In this video, I'm going to be talking about starting to add different flours into your sourdough. Because flour is not just flour. Hi, I'm Elaine Boddy from Foodbod Sourdough, and you join me in my kitchen today and we're going to talk about adding different flour into your sourdough loaves and doughs. What you'll see here and you'll see behind me is flour and dough. There's going to be a lot to show you, but the intention being to give you the perfect starting point of starting to add different flours into your sourdough. So for me, the best starting point is always 100% white loaf. So this loaf has been made fully with strong white bread flour. So for this one, I've used the Matthews Churchill's strong white bread flour in that one. So that is your easy, simple starting point. And what I often see when people first start making sourdough is they make a loaf, their lovely first new fabulous loaf of strong white bread flour, and immediately go, oh, I'm going to play with lots of other flours, which is great. However, if I could show some caution in your direction, especially if you're new, the best thing to do initially is to start with your strong white bread flour, make 2 or 3 loaves, just get to grips with how it works before you start playing around with other flours. Because what you'll then start to find or discover is flour isn't just flour. It's not straight, simple swaps. So this is something that I learned completely by trial and error, playing around with things in my kitchen, which is the whole reason I ended up writing my first book, because I was playing around with different whole grain flours, which drew the attention of my now fabulous publisher. So I've played with all these flours. I know how they work, which is why I can give you guidance on them. So if you want a written reference as well, if you've got my book, The Sourdough Bible, there's references for you about flour on page 48 and page 284. You'll always also see details in my whole grain book, my Sourdough Whisperer book, but you've got written references as well. So the key thing to remember when you start using new flours is to go small, because they don't all behave the same. Some need more water, some need less, so let me explain. When we use our strong white bread flour, the best way to, the best option to make for sourdough is to choose a flour that has got a decent amount of protein and is good quality. So when we talk about protein in flour, we're talking about the protein that comes from the wheat, from the gluten, and a good strong white bread flour will have between, say, 12 and 13% protein. And some bags will actually say the percentage on the front of them. Some of them you need to base it on the nutritional value. So when you look at the table on the side, it will show you the nutritional value, and you can scale it from there from what it is per 100 grams. If you're in the US, they usually use their nutritional values tend to be per 30 grams. So if you have got a flour that says it's 4 grams of protein per 30 grams, that's absolutely fine, because that therefore equates to over 12 grams of protein per 100 grams. So it's a really easy way and a good way to start with sourdough. If you go for a good quality flour as well, then you know it's going to work perfectly with the recipe. If you are using a flour that comes from maybe a supermarket, it tends to be a mix of blended flours, and you'll need less water to counter that. But a good starting point, your strong white bread flour. It's going to make it really easy to work with. When you then want to come and start playing around with other flours, that immediately then moves into whole grain flours. So typically the first thing someone wants to then play with will be whole wheat or wholemeal. In this country, we tend to say wholemeal, but more and more it's becoming whole wheat. So this is typical whole wheat flour. And the main difference is that when it's sifted, when the flour is sifted, a lot of the bran is kept in. So to make the white flour, they're sifting it out. When you're having wholemeal flour, they're keeping it in. And it's that will make a difference. So the whole wheat element, that added bran, will soak up more water. So when you're going into a whole wheat flour, you're going to start to feel a difference and maybe a tightness in your dough, which is what you'll see when I show you the difference in the doughs. The best way to start with this and any flours is to start small. If you immediately go from making a straight white loaf to a straight wholemeal loaf, 100% wholemeal, you're going to really see the difference because you're going to have a really, really tight, heavy dough. You will also end up with a much denser, closer crumb on your bread. So whenever people message me and say, why have I got such a dense or a heavy loaf? My question will always be, what flour are you using? So if you're using a lot of whole grain flour, please keep in mind you will get a less airy loaf because that's the nature of the flour. And that's fine. Sourdough does not have to be light and airy. It just has to be healthy and tasty. So this is the main difference. So it's the wheat and the wheat germ in this and the bran that's going to make it a tighter loaf. So that doesn't necessarily mean you need to go straight into using more water. It's something to play with. But the best thing to do is to start small. So something like this loaf here, with this one, and I only did it as an oval just as something different. With this loaf, I've used my standard master recipe, and all I've done is replace 100 grams of the flour with a wholemeal spelt flour or a whole grain spelt flour. And by doing that, I haven't had to change anything else. I haven't changed the water, I haven't changed anything else. So whatever you're going to use, that's your perfect starting point. So it could be that you want to start with spelt flour, which is often really popular. It's a popular thing to start off with. Or you want to go into trying some of the ancient grains. So if you try an einkorn or an emmer flour, always with the einkorn, go for the whole grain option. In the UK, we only have the whole grain option. In the US, you can get the all-purpose option. That's a whole different ball game. Go with the whole grain option. It works really, really well. But again, just start small. Start with just 100 grams. So instead of having 500 grams of your strong white bread flour, just replace 100 grams of it with your different flour. That way, you can start to feel how different the dough is. You can see how much you like the taste. And you don't need to change the water because as you increase it, you will need to. So when you take something like these flours, you might look on the back of this and you go, oh, what's the protein like on this? So this whole grain emmer flour is 14% protein, which sounds really high, which is. But that doesn't mean that it's going to behave the way you think it does. So this may sound all a bit overly confusing, but the thing to keep in mind is when you come to flours like these, so emmer, einkorn, spelt flour, Coruscant flour, even rye flour, they are considered ancient grains. Just because it's got a decent percentage of protein kind of goes against the grain of what I said earlier. It doesn't mean it's going to hold the water and hold its shape in the same way. So if you look at any of these ancient grain flours, these whole grain flours, the more you put into your dough, the less water you need. So they're not as stable. The beauty of the ancient grains is they taste amazing. They're lovely to work with. They make great starters. But when you put them in your dough, the more of the percentage of these flours you put in your dough, you need to offset it with less water. Or you need to give it some building blocks. So what you'll see in different recipes of mine is if I start to use more of these flours, I might then throw in some seeds. And seeds are a great way to give your loaf structure. Now, we've got another video that's talking about adding ingredients, so I'm not going to get heavily into that one at the moment. But if you feel like you've got a dough that you've used a lot of these other flours in, you might have added some of the light rye flour, you might have gone with some white spelt flour, in which case you'll have a really soft dough. If you're concerned about it, add some seeds. Just chuck in 50 grams of seeds, 100 grams of seeds, and what you do is you almost give it some scaffolding, because the seeds will give back the structure that these flours don't have. So I highly recommend that you play with these flours, but definitely start small. Same comes into if you're using rye flour. A lot of people ask about rye flour. It's very tasty, but it's very sticky to work with. So this will be the other thing that you'll discover the more you add in whole grains. Not so much with straight whole wheat flour, but as soon as you go into the einkorn, the emmer, rye flour, light rye, you'll get sticky dough, which is the nature of it. So go with it. Rye flour in particular will give you a sticky dough. So if you want to start with the dark rye flour in your loaves, start with just 50 grams. So start small and build it up. The more you go, the more you add. You might even want to bake the loaf in a pan because the dough might not be holding its shape as much. So I'm going to show you some doughs just so that you can see some different things to do with them, so that you can see how the 100% whole wheat feels, so that you can see the difference with it between a white and 100% whole wheat. But absolutely, the best advice I can give you if you want to start playing with other flours is keep in mind that they're not a direct swap. They're absolutely not. So make sure you start small, because when you've started your sourdough journey, you've made your lovely loaf, you're feeling fabulous about it. If you're then going to chuck a whole different flour into it, you'll suddenly get a loaf that you'll go, whoa, what happened there? And you think you've got this thing, this random word that people use called a fail, which personally I don't believe in, because what you will have done therefore is learned that actually the flour works differently. So let's show you some other doughs, but if you take nothing else away from this video, it's start small and build it up, and then consider the differences in water. So if you look at my whole grain book, you'll see that with the different flours, there are different allowances for the water, because by changing the water is how we can control and manipulate the dough. So let's show you some dough. What I have in front of me here is some doughs to show you some comparison of what they will look like with different flours in. So we have my standard white dough. So this dough has been made with 100% strong white bread flour. Still coming up and proving a bit, as you can see, but it's got a nice, slightly upwardly domed surface, smooth. This is your typical standard strong white bread flour dough. I'll put it in a banneton in a minute so you can see how it behaves. Whereas this one here, this one, just to show you the difference, this has got 50-50, half strong white bread flour, half wholemeal spelt flour. So you can see all the flecks in it. You can see it's still got a nice, happy, slightly upwardly domed surface, nice and smooth. But these are two typical comparisons of doughs. And then we come into your 100% wholemeal. So I've done this as a smaller dough, just so that you can see something different. But what you can see is this has been proving all night and into the morning. It hasn't really spread. It hasn't really changed that much. It's still remained quite firm because of the density of the dough. So you can see the difference in them. I wouldn't worry about it too much because it's still grown up nicely. So this gives you a direct comparison on how they look. I'm going to put them into their bannetons so you can see how they feel and how they behave when we're working with them. So let's just start with your white dough. Got my banneton. It's already got its layer of rice flour in there, but we're just going to add a little bit extra, like we do. And then I'm going to use my usual action of pulling the dough into a nice ball. So you can see, nice stretchy dough. This is what we're used to. This is your lovely, lovely, simple, white, strong white bread flour. Can you see the bubbles? And whenever people worry, I talked about this on another video, forget the whole worry about squashing the bubbles. You need to be firm here. Squash the bubbles. Be bold. You hear that? That's me bursting the bubbles, which is fine, and it's good. So we're pulling that into its nice ball. Okay, so we've got our nice smooth ball that's going to go into our banneton. There we are. We're going to whack a bit of flour over the top, cover on, and that one will go into the fridge. So let's just do as a comparison. So this is our half and half. So with this one, we're going to put it into an oval banneton, just as something different. What you'll feel and you'll hear when you start to work with this is you'll almost hear the dough, because you'll hear the whole grain in it. So as you pull it up, you can see the flecks all the way through the dough. You will find as well, as soon as you start to add whole grain, you will get nice firm doughs, because again, that's the nature of the whole grain flours, because they soak up a bit more water. And as you do it, you can almost hear it talking. You'll see the texture in the dough. I almost forgot then. I did forget, didn't I, that we're going oval. So I'm just going to pull it into a ball and then just kind of squish the shape a little bit, putting it into its oval banneton. But anyway, I've done it as a ball. It will fill and it will ease out and fill the shape. If you want to see me pulling together dough for going in an oval banneton, you'll see that in some of the other videos. So this is your lovely ball of half whole grain spelt flour, half strong white bread flour. And see how easily it comes into shape. And look at all the speckles. This is what we want. This is the bran. This is what makes it the whole grain. So I'm going to plonk that still, even though I pulled it into a ball. I'm going to put that into the oval banneton, and it will spread and fill the shape. We can just push it down a bit. There you go, look. It'll be fine. Because this is real life. That's that one. That will go into the fridge. So this one, this is your smaller dough. So same size banneton. These work with whatever size dough you've got. So this one will behave quite differently. Sometimes you'll find if you've got a lot of whole grain in a dough, as soon as you touch it, it feels like it collapses, which again is fine. Just keep going with it. If you've made a decently strong enough dough, it's going to grow back and do its thing. So if it collapses a bit, try not to worry unless it's overproofed. If you've overproofed your dough, that's going to be a whole different thing. But try not to worry if you touch it and it seems to go and just run out of energy and run out of breath. It's going to be fine if it's still got all that structure in it. So this one, look. This is because it's 100% whole grain. So we still want to do this whole, do you see what I mean? It's like I've pushed it into itself and you think, oh, I'm losing it. But it's fine because it's strong enough, it's going to grow up fine. So this, mega smooth, easy to bring into a ball, like putty. It's a really easy thing to work with. And look, it's not really doing much because you've got all that whole grain. It's going to hold whatever you do with it, really. But all we want it to do is go into its ball so that we can put it into the banneton. Quite simply, going to put it in, bit of rice flour over the top, and then that will go into the fridge. And you'll be able to see me bake one of those. So that's the main difference between them. And you know, I highly recommend playing with different flours. You just need to keep in mind that they work so differently. And again, some of them are regenerative. So this is, you know, the YQ is, I mean, it's a lovely regenerative flour. It's another whole wheat. All of them, you just need to make allowances. If you start to come into working with white spelt flour, that's a whole different thing because it's very, very fine. It's had all of the bran sifted out of it again. It's a very fine, very soft flour. So if you're going to go half and half with this one, you might need a bit less water to offset it. If you try to make an entire loaf with just white spelt flour, the dough is going to be very soft. It's not going to hold its shape. That's when you'd need to bake it in a pan, or you need to add some seeds to it to give it that structure we talked about. The same, really, if you tried to do 100% spelt loaf, 100% whole grain spelt loaf. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to feel different, but again, it's not going to hold its shape. So you're better off baking it in a pan if you can. So, or again, you add the seeds to it. So you'll see these things in different recipes and all the things that I've written, you'll see them in my books. I highly recommend playing with them. Start small, build it up, but be aware that they need to be, you know, they need to be dealt with differently. The easiest thing to manage your dough is to use less water. The alternative thing is to throw in some seeds and give it some structure. But do play with your different flours and the things that you can find. Okay, I realise I'm repeating myself, but it's the simple answer. I see so many people do this. Oh, I've made a loaf. I want to start playing with different flours. Do play with them. I highly recommend it. But please, please, please start small and go from there, and it will be to your benefit. So I'm going to get that one in the fridge, and then we'll see what it looks like when you turn it out and score it. So here we have a 100% whole wheat or wholemeal flour dough that I proved all night, and then it's been sitting in the banneton. So this one we're going to bake whilst we're talking so that you can see how it turns out. But also so that you can see these doughs will stay very stiff, especially once they've been in the fridge. So, you know, as a recap, this is your 100% whole wheat. So this is the furthest you can go with using your whole wheat flour, and it's going to be a denser dough. We saw the dough earlier. This is now what it looks like, and it hasn't changed that much in how it's grown whilst it's been in the fridge. So I'm going to score this one and get it into the oven so that you can see it as part of this video. So I've made this as a smaller loaf just to do something different with it. It doesn't mean you have to do that. You will find recipes for 100% whole wheat loaves in my books. Or you can just take the guidance from this video and play around with it yourself. So you can make it the full size, or you can make it the smaller size. I like baking the smaller size doughs in the smaller pan. You don't have to. You know, whatever pan you use, as I've said in previous videos, should be fine for your doughs. Doesn't matter how big it is, because your dough should be holding its shape. So this is when you are going to have the firmest looking dough. It's going to always hold its shape well because of all those extras in the flour that we've talked about. So I'm just going to give this quick score, and then we're going to get it into the oven and move on. So it also means it's a joy to score, partly because it's been in the fridge, and partly because of the firmness you get in that dough. You can see how cleanly you can score that. We're going to bake this, as this is a smaller dough, we're going to bake this for 45 minutes from cold, setting the oven to 220 degrees centigrade or 425 degrees Fahrenheit, assuming you're using a fan-assisted oven or a convection oven. Make the relevant changes if you're using a standard non-fan oven. In that one goes, and I shall be back. So whilst we wait for the oven to beep, which is going to be very, very soon, like a minute and a half, the eagle-eyed among you might have noticed we have got a bag of the very famous Cotswold Crunch here, the most popular flour from Matthew's Cotswold Flour. And we also have 8 grain, which is probably the second most popular. And I'm going to be doing a video specifically using these flours, which is why I haven't mentioned them yet. But again, if you have bought some and you want to start playing around with them until you see our next video, again, start small. Start with your 100 grams and build it up from there, because again, they're not a straight swap. Also to explain, the reason my whole wheat flour is in a jar is because I have a great big bag of it, which is why I decanted some to show you. So I've got a lot of flours because that's my job. I wouldn't recommend that you need to go straight out and buy a whole chunk of these, but I would recommend starting to play around a little bit and see what you like. And whenever people say, you know, is it really worth bothering? Yeah, it is actually, because you get such a different flavour. And as soon as you go into using whole grain flours, you do get more flavour in your sourdough. You'll get more sourness. You'll start to get just a different feel in your mouth. So I would recommend playing around with it. Just, oh, there we go. Like I said, it's coming. Just remember, start small every time. So let's just turn that off. And we're going to see how our cute little 100% whole grain sour loaf has come out. Whole wheat sour loaf. Sourdough. Bleh. Look at that. This is our very cute 100% whole wheat loaf. So from that little tight dough that you saw me score, here it is. This is the baked loaf. So let's see if we can get my asbestos fingers in there to pull it out so that you can see. Look at that. It's a very cute little loaf. So you can see the texture. I mean, it's all about this texture and the bran. So this is, it's still quite light. It's heavier than if it was 100% white, but it is still opening up. There's still a lightness and a joy to it, but when you slice into it, it is going to be denser. So this is your 100% whole wheat sourdough loaf. So it can be done. It probably had just a tiny extra bit of water in it when I put it together. But the best thing to do is to start with your standard amount of water, unless you're following one of my recipes. I have a recipe in one of my books, which is 100% whole wheat. It does have a tiny bit more water in it, but that's also based on the flour I'm using. There's something to keep in mind very, very much, is that unless you are using the exact same flour as me, the exact same water, the exact same environment, things will often need to be tweaked. But for me, with the flour that I was using, which is the Matthew's stone ground whole grain flour, I added just an extra 20 or so grams of water to my loaf. And you saw what the dough was like. So play around with it, but you can always add water. You can't ever take it away. So just start with the standard, unless you're following one of my other recipes. So there is, isn't it cute? There's our little whole grain loaf. Here we are with our loaves. And something that I'm just going to clarify, which is a conversation that James, my very famous cameraman that you now know, and I were talking about, just to make something completely clear about the water content. So when I was making this loaf, which is 100% whole wheat flour, and I used an extra bit of water in it, that was necessary for this flour. When you come into ancient grains, like the einkorn, emmer, whole grain spelt flour, rye flour, dark rye flour, that are also whole grain, but they are based on ancient grain flours and heritage wheats. They often need a bit less water, even if they've got a decent protein content. So that starts to sound a bit confusing, but that's all to do with the fact that they are not as stable. They don't hold their structure in the same way. So it's the difference between a modern variety whole wheat flour and that grain compared to the older heritage grains that are the einkorn, emmer, spelt flour. So hopefully that makes some sense. I have written about it. You've always got that reference in my books. So just for a bit of fun on this one, I thought I would slice into this loaf so that you can see. So we all know what it looks like in a nice white loaf. Let's have some fun and slice into this one. So I'm going to slice this right down the middle, which is often what you see creators do on Instagram and things like that. It's not what I normally do, because to me, you start at one end and you cut through. But for this occasion, we're going to go right through the middle so that you can hear the crust and you can see what it looks like on the inside. So here we go. This is what I work out at the gym for. Ooh. So here we go. Let's have a look inside. And this has been sitting on the side for a lot of hours so that I could show you. And here is, look at that. So this is our loaf with just 100 grams of whole grain spelt in it. Look at that. Smells good. I'm sure it's going to taste good. Now here's the big question. Do I let James take this one? We'll think about that. But hopefully this has given you a good starting point and some good guidance for starting with some new flours. Go and play. Just start by buying one or two and just play around with them and see what you think. Definitely try them in a starter. Spoon out a bit of your starter, put a different flour in it, see what it does. I talked about that on a previous video as well. Especially the regenerative flours. Starters love them. But have a play and see what you think. You might think you just want to stick with the white. Absolutely, nothing wrong with that at all. If you are making sourdough using 100% strong white bread flour, it's still far healthier than anything you're going to buy in a shop. If you want to start adding the extra nutrients and some whole grain element, always keep my voice in your head. Start small and build it up. So there we go. That's been me. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you for watching.